And now, we reach for the part of the program we've been waiting for. Astronaut John Grunsfeld joins us tonight as our keynote speaker. And it is an incredible honor to welcome home such an esteemed and accomplished Chicago native. Not only was his father a distinguished Chicago architect, whose homes I built, and his grandfather, the architect of the Adler Planetarium, but John holds the most important distinction of all. He graduated from Highland Park High School with Nancy and I and several others in this room. There is no question that this is an exciting time for space exploration, and I want to leave it to John to describe his own personal experiences rather than attempting to recap his illustrious career. I think we're all in for a real treat. At the end of John's presentation, we will then be joined by Larry Potash for a moderated Q&A with John. Questions from the audience are welcome during this time, finishing just in time for an exclusive proprietary virtual appearance by our returning friend Dan White, the magician at the Nomad. This will conclude our program. So with that, please sit back, enjoy our evening of exploration with Dr. John Grunsfeld.
Well, Ross, Nancy, thank you very much for inviting me for this very special event tonight. I have to get the computer booted up. Real quick poll, how many people graduated from Highland Park High School? Okay, of course, I can't see because of the lights. How many people here are class of 1976? Wow, that's awesome, quite a few hands. How about class of 1978? That's my wife. We're here, I'm here because Nancy and Ross asked me to come, and they are my classmates. And we've talked, several of the previous speakers about community, about coming together over crisis. Certainly the loss of Greg, was a crisis. We're also in the middle of a crisis right now, which is the COVID pandemic. And, very much like Greg's loss, we've lost in the United States over 600,000 people. I know, quite a few people who lost their lives, and also preventable. And so if anybody's embarrassed to answer, but how many of you are vaccinated? Right, why? Because you think about good decisions, you think about risk. And getting COVID or getting very sick from COVID is preventable. But tonight I want to talk about a little bit about exploration. And I think I'm up on the screen. First of all, I want to remind you that we live on a planet. And if you see here, that's Lake Michigan. You can see Space Shuttle Atlantis. I was taking this picture from the Mir space station in 1997, and this was February, so you have this to look forward to. But for those of you who are, paying attention, this sort of gray area here, that's all that slush and melting snow in the city of Chicago, and we're lucky enough to live, up here in this nice place. And of course, you all love the snow, right? And the cold. That's why we live in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago. I went to Highland Park High School. I asked my current wife when I was a senior if she wanted to go out on a date. She said no. And I came back from college and asked her out one more time, and we had mutual friends, and she said no. 10 years later, on the streets of the Chicago, right on Clark Street, right there, we just happened to be passing on the street, and we talked, and I asked her out, and she said yes, and the rest is history. But that's not what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk more about spaceflight. And, I think all of you know about NASA, but probably not all of you really know about what NASA does. And so I like to try and come up with relatively short mission statements for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's more powerful, and two, because I can remember them. It has to be very short. And so what I think NASA does is we innovate, we invent things. And certainly many of the things we've invented have changed all of our lives. But we invent things to be able to go out and explore. And we do go out and explore. We both explore the Earth. It's little known, but in the Space Act of 1958, which chartered NASA, NASA was born on the 1st of October 1958 when that act was enacted. The first line of what NASA is supposed to do is to study the Earth from space. But we also study the human body in space. We study the planets. We study the stars, galaxies, the universe. And when we explore, we discover things. And that's what humans do. We go out and we explore and we discover things. And when we discover things and communicate that, it inspires people and in the United States and the nation and the world. And so we innovate, explore, discover, and inspire. Now, I'm a scientist. I love science. And what NASA does is try and answer big scientific questions. Things like, where did we come from? Where did the universe come from? How did the stars and galaxies form? How did our solar system form? How did the Earth form? Where are we going? What's the future trajectory of the universe or the Earth? Right now, the Earth's trajectory is not that great. We're kind of spoiling it. But that's not tonight's topic. And then the thing that really interests me now, professionally, as far as a scientist, is the question of, are we alone? Is there life beyond Earth? Now, as a scientist, it seems compelling that there would be life on other worlds. But for the first time in human history, we have the means, the technology, to be able to go out and search for life, either on other planets in our solar system, or moons of planets in our solar system, or looking at other stars that have planets orbiting them to see if there's life there. And so this is a unique time in human history that we are on the verge of being able to answer this last question. Now, Larry will almost certainly ask me, what do I think about William Shatner, Captain Kirk, flying into space? Because in the world of Star Trek, the galaxy is filled with alien life. And so I grew up on Star Trek, and so it seems like a natural consequence that the galaxy will be filled with life. But we actually don't know. But I think in the next decade or two, we may have an answer to that question. Now, I talked about exploring planets, and we are doing that right now. I think all of you know, hopefully, that we have a mini-van-size robotic explorer on the surface of Mars now. We actually have two, Curiosity, which landed in 2012, and just last year, the Perseverance rover, which is exploring an area called Jezero Crater, which we now know was an ancient lake about 3.5 billion years ago. And that's a really interesting time because that ancient lake was filled with water, obviously it's a lake, at the same time that life emerged on Earth. So the big question is, did life emerge on Mars as well? Now, life could have emerged on Mars 3.5 billion years ago, and Mars could have been smacked by a big asteroid and sent a rock to Earth that started life on Earth. We could be Martians. It's possible. But we're not the only ones who are sending things to Mars. The Chinese have now landed on the surface of Mars. The Russians have tried many times. Other countries have tried. But Russia and the European Space Agency next year hopefully will launch their rover, which, appropriate to this evening's event, is called the Rosalind Franklin Rover. Now, the Rosalind Franklin School of Medicine, And there's a lot of connections here. First of all, you might wonder, who is Rosalind Franklin? Maybe she's a big donor of the medical school. Well, no, she's not. First of all, she's deceased, and she helped develop the technology and imaged DNA for the first time that allowed Watson and Crick to understand the structure. So she was helping to see the unseen using this really clever X-ray crystallography technique. Now, it happens that this rover will also have an X-ray instrument to help reveal what is on the surface of Mars and look for life. Now, unfortunately, she passed away before Watson and Crick got the Nobel Prize, and as is the practice of the Swedish Academy, they do not award Nobel Prizes to people who are deceased, which is unfortunate because there are very few women Nobel Prize winners, and she almost certainly would have been one. But tonight we're talking about Greg, and Greg was an explorer in his own right. He loved both adventure and exploration and the search for knowledge. Nancy mentioned the T-shirt, and there on the right, you can see said T-shirt. And it says, "Explore NASA. Failure is not an option." And in that, I'm sure Greg meant the failure to explore is not an option. And in his life, that's how he lived. Now, NASA has been able to piece together through its spacecraft, through telescopes, by funding physicists and astronomers and earth scientists, solar system scientists, to put together a story that's really pretty remarkable. And that story begins with what we call the Big Bang. And that's from telescopic observations of the first moments of our universe, as encoded by a kind of static that pervades the universe. It's the black body radiation that's now microwaves passing through everywhere. Now, fortunately, in this audience, I can talk about, remember when you were searching for Channel 9 on the television? And you switched from UHF, WFLD, Channel 32, and you'd go to Channel 11, and in between those, there was static, and then you'd go 11, 10, 9, and then the Cubs would be on. And you'd go, not those losers. And you'd switch back to Channel 11 to watch some British educational show. Well, on Channel 10, it was nothing but static. That static was noise in the television, but about half of that was actually the microwave signature of the Big Bang that is pervading the universe. It's going through us right now. And so astronomers were able to look at that and build specialized telescopes that were able to see that static was created and emerging 280,000 years after the beginning of the universe. And using telescopes like the Hubble Space Telescope, we've been able to image from not quite the first stars, but from around 300 million years after the Big Bang to the present, to see how stars form, black holes, galaxies, solar systems, all leading up to the formation of our own solar system about 5 billion years ago, when our sun collapsed from a cloud of gas and dust, and it turned on as a star, and at the same time, our solar system was born. The planets formed, the Earth formed. Really a remarkable story, and I would love to tell you that that's it. We understand the whole universe. But later on, I'm going to tell you why that's not quite true. There are a few details. Much of this was learned from the Hubble Space Telescope. Now, the Hubble Space Telescope, which I've dedicated most of my life to upgrading, repairing, servicing, and I'll show you one example of that from my last mission in 2009, is not a particularly large telescope. In fact, it would fit in this tent. But because it's above the Earth's atmosphere, it has a unique position. One reason is that anywhere on Earth, the Earth is kind of shaking. And if you have a telescope that's trying to point at the stars as the Earth rotates, all those gears and motors cause the telescope to shake as well. But most importantly, our Earth's atmosphere distorts our image of the sky. And it's easy to see that if you go up maybe tonight and look at the stars. What do? They twinkle. The stars don't twinkle. Our atmosphere is turbulent, and our view of the stars causes them kind of to move around. So on Earth-based telescopes, you can't get super clear views of the cosmos. Not only that, some of the light is absorbed by our atmosphere and never makes it down to the surface. So by being above the atmosphere, we have a completely clear view of the universe. And so even a small telescope, 2.4 meters across, a little bit bigger than these tables, we can see almost to the edge of the known universe. Now, when Hubble was launched in 1990, many of you may remember that it was kind of a flop. And in fact, the whole future of NASA was on the line because the mirror was slightly misshapen. It was a mistake by the people who ground it. I won't tell you that it was a company called Perkin-Elmer. But the engineers made a very small mistake having to do with both the way they ground it and the way they measured it. Now, to give you a sense of how bad this error was, at the edge of this telescope, 2.4 meters across, they misground it by about 1/40th of a human hair's width. I mean, almost undetectable. But they could have detected it. They didn't. And it went up to space, and there were lots of cartoons and descriptions of, Mr. Magoo, the Hubble telescope, the moon, distorted, looking like a peanut, Jupiter, Saturn, all wavy, and a lot of very angry taxpayers. And in fact, Congress was angry. We had spent $3 billion in 1990 dollars, that's about $10 billion today, on this telescope, and it wasn't right. It was part of a program called the Great Observatories. It wasn't even a good telescope, certainly not great. But by looking at the images, astronomers, optical scientists were very quickly able to see exactly what was wrong, and not only see that the stars were fuzzy, but because of measuring the shapes of the fuzz, they were able to ascertain the actual shape of the mirror, understand that it was slightly misshapen, and design a set of contact lenses, basically, that they could put in the telescope and fix it. So that's exactly what we did. In 1993, a team of women and men in white suits, like cowboys of the West, rode to the rescue. Those whites, well, not white hats, white suits. Those suits were the spacewalking suits. They went up to orbit, and they corrected the optics by putting in these contact lenses. Now, technically, they weren't lenses. They were mirrors, but the same thing. The mirrors had the opposite curvature to fix the big mirror. And after that, the results were spectacular. Now, the Hubble was designed to be fixed by people spacewalking. And so all in all, we did 5 missions to upgrade and repair the telescope. The telescope was originally designed for a 15-year lifetime. It's still up there operating now after 31 years because we were able to go up and service it. Now, in 2011, we retired the space shuttle. The final mission to the Hubble Space Telescope was in 2009. I had the privilege of being on missions in 1999, 2002, and 2009, the last 3 missions to the Hubble Space Telescope. And Hubble could go on for another decade. We don't know how long it will last. So it's pretty exciting that we've been able to have all of that great scientific information for all those years. So what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit of the story of the 2009 mission, the final mission to the Hubble Space Telescope. I'll introduce the crew just quickly. In the middle is Scott Altman. I think all of you know Scott Altman because he's another Illini. He's from Pekin, Illinois. No? Do you remember some B movie about a fighter pilot going through a fighter pilot school in San Diego? Top Gun? Yeah. Okay, you remember that? The actor never amounted to anything who played that. But Paramount actually hired the United States Navy and the squadron of Tomcats to be in that film. And the person in that Tomcat, for whatever that actor's name was actually Scott Altman. So there's a particular scene in that movie where the Tomcat goes up over inverted on top of a Russian MiG. It was actually a Northrop F-5, but it doesn't matter. Had a red star on it. And waved. I think he waved, right? Or pointed a finger. Yeah, that was Scott's finger. So that's Scott Altman. I got to fly with Scott twice. This was his 4th mission. And that actor, in case you can't remember, is some guy named Tom Cruise. Has he been in any other movies since then? I don't think so. Greg Johnson was our pilot, another Navy pilot, his first flight. Megan MacArthur, an oceanographer from Scripps Institution, San Diego, on her first flight. Hopefully you recognize this guy. Drew Feustel was my spacewalking partner. I was the payload commander for all of the Hubble activities and spacewalks. Drew was on his first space flight. He's a geophysicist. Mike Good, an Air Force colonel and pilot, aerospace engineer on his first flight, and Mike Massimino on his second flight. He was also with Scott and myself on the previous Hubble mission. And so that's the team that we put together to go back to Hubble for the final time. And we were flying after the tragic loss of Columbia. So we actually had 2 space shuttles, Atlantis, which we flew on, and then Endeavour on the launch pad in case we got into trouble. This is walking out to the launch pad. We wear orange suits. These are pressure suits, space suits, in case we have to jump out of the space shuttle, which is kind of a crazy thing if you think about it. But it made us feel better. And if you're going to space, you ought to be wearing a spacesuit. We also have parachutes. We sit on a parachute. That's Greg getting strapped into the space shuttle. We get strapped in a couple hours before. That's also sort of a crazy thing, like we're going to jump out going Mach 10 at 200,000 feet and pull a parachute. But again, it makes us feel better. And that's all from that's all as a result of the loss of Challenger. We thought we have to try something. About 6 to 8 seconds before launch, we light the main engines. There's 3 liquid engines. Solid rocket motors. When the solid rocket motors light, you're going somewhere. The computers know where you're going, but it's not exactly clear from inside because it's just violence. And so the first couple of minutes, we're riding those solid rocket motors. They separate. We actually had cameras on those solid rocket motors so you can see the shuttle flying away. Those boosters land in the water. They're fully reused. They come down on a parachute. They actually have microphones. We hear them splash down or after the fact. And then 8.5 minutes later, we're on orbit doing 17,500 miles an hour. We dump the big tank of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, open the payload bay doors, and we're orbiting the Earth once every 96 minutes. Now, all of our equipment is stored inside of the cabin for doing spacewalks, and outside, all of the equipment we need to upgrade and repair the Hubble Space Telescope. But the first thing we have to do is grab the telescope. And so we orbited the Earth for a couple of days, catching up with the Hubble, and eventually got right underneath the Hubble. And at that point, Scott Altman manually flew the space shuttle under the Hubble. The space shuttle is about the size of a commercial airliner, weighs 220,000 pounds. The Hubble is about 16,000 pounds, and is about 24,600 pounds, 26,500 pounds actually. And so it's about the same scale as the space shuttle. So Scott has to get underneath it without hitting it, so that Megan MacArthur could reach out with the robotic arm and grab the Hubble. Her first space flight, her first time to fly the robotic arm, and she's going to reach out and grab the now worth about $8 billion Hubble Space Telescope, an international resource for science, and she gets one chance to grab it. If she bumps it and misses, it will start rotating, and that's the end of the Hubble. So if you think there's a lot of pressure, to say the least. But fortunately, she was awesome. She grabbed it the first time. We put it into the payload bay, and that allowed us to get dressed in our spacewalking pajamas, get into our spacesuits, and go out for a walk, which was a good thing because with 7 people on board, 4 spacesuits, all of the spacewalking gear, plus bags and bags of equipment to go outside and fix the shuttle in case we got hit, like Columbia. With all kinds of epoxy guns and leading edges for the wings, extra stuff. I was glad to get out for a walk. So here I am, buttoned up in the spacesuit with Drew Feustel. Scott Altman's in the airlock with us, giving us some last words of wisdom. I think he wanted to go out for a walk too, but he didn't have a spacesuit. And so we highly recommended that before we turned that handle with the yellow arrow and let all the air out of the airlock, he should probably get back inside, which is especially good because at the end of the mission, he's the guy that has to land. So we went outside, and here I am in my spacesuit, and there's a couple of things I hope you can see in this. One, I have a big grin on my face, and I just love being in space. And even more than being in space, I love being in a spacesuit. You're in your own spaceship. And you notice in Star Trek they never had spacesuits? I've always wondered about that. But these spacesuits are awesome. First of all, you can see that the Earth is reflected in my visor. There's the wing of the space shuttle. All of my tools have to be on tethers because otherwise they'd float away. You know, it's like if you're up on a ladder and you drop the screwdriver, I got to go down. Well, if I dropped a screwdriver, down is the Earth. You know, so it's a long way. There's no ladder. The backpack has all the oxygen. It has a little water supply that's used for cooling. It has batteries. You can see I have high and low beam lights, you know, so we can work round the clock. It even had cameras, and you'll see some of those views. And this was the first day, and I was so excited to see my old friend, the Hubble, again, and because we were going to put in this amazing camera into Hubble called the Wide Field Camera 3, but it's the new super-duper digital camera on the Hubble. Now, before we put in the new super-duper digital camera, we had to take out the old camera. And the old camera is this white box here. It's about the size of a grand piano. That's me. You can tell it's me because of the red stripe. This is Drew Feustel. In his suit, he has no stripe at all, and he's playing with a wrench. And he's a car mechanic. He had a Comet. Anybody remember the Comet? Yeah, so he was really good at fixing cars because that Comet was a lousy car. And his kids race go-karts, so he loves to do things. And, well, he couldn't get the bolt undone to bring out the old camera. And this was a big problem. Of course, I thought, well, you know, rookie spacewalker, you know, he's probably just doing it wrong. So I went over and tried, and sure enough, the bolt was stuck. So I went down and I grabbed another wrench and I came up and gave it to him, and he tried it again, and it was still stuck. It was torqued down, tightened down way too tight, apparently. Now the problem with that is, if we tried to turn it and the bolt broke off, you know, then we'd really be screwed. We'd never get that camera out. Well, here we are, you know, floating through space, traveling 5 miles per second, trying to get this bolt off.
Okay,
and,
here we go. I think I got it. It turned. It definitely turned. Yep, it turned.
Yeah, so that was me saying, you know, it turned. But, well, okay, so you know it worked, but I didn't. That's why I didn't sound, I wasn't like, yay, we got it out. No, it turned because it could have broken off. The shaft could have broken. We had no idea at that point. Now, fortunately, it's not just Drew and me out there playing around. Inside was Mike Massimino, and he has the big book of knowledge, the checklist. And there's a little thin section that's the checklist that's do these things when things are going well. And then there's a big thick part that says what to do when things go wrong, the contingency checklist. And in there it says, you know, what if you can't get, you know, the connector off? What if you can't turn the bolt? Oh, we're in that section. Okay, if the bolt won't turn, go get the other wrench. Well, we'd already done that. Turn up the torque on the wrench. Okay, we had already done that. But even on board, we have the checklist, we have the 7 of us, we can talk. On the ground, we have hundreds of experts, people that we can go talk to. So here we are, you're listening to Car Talk with Click and Clack, the Tappet brothers. Who likes Car Talk? They're the best. Go ahead, Florida Collar. So why do NASA engineers always have mustaches? I don't know. But he says, okay, here's my problem. So we could ask people on the ground, and we did. And they said, go ahead and just try and turn it without any torque protection. And
it was tougher to do than we thought, but you know, it has ended with just beautifully. Well, I've just lost 5 years of my life, I think.
so fortunately, you know, we got it out. And so we put in the new camera, and I'll show you some images from it. But we also replaced things that had failed, gyros, batteries, repaired other instruments on the Hubble. This is a picture of Mike Good. You can tell because he has the candy stripes, and he's holding a Hubble battery. So it's not, you know, we're not putting little AAAs in or AA's. They're 350-pound nickel hydrogen batteries, and the first set lasted for 16 years. And so I'm hoping we get much more than that out of this set. And just in case we are attacked by space aliens, being a good Air Force guy, he's got his death ray laser. Actually, that's called a pistol grip tool. That's our powered screwdriver. And Hubble was designed with all the same bolt head sizes, so we could use the same sockets. And that's how we unscrewed things and put new things in. This is the corrective optics. Remember I mentioned the contact lenses? Well, it's about the size of a Sub-Zero refrigerator. It weighs about 1,000 pounds. And I convinced Drew, he's got his death ray laser too, I convinced Drew to go to the gym every day for 3 years lifting weights so that he could pick up this 1,000-pound instrument. Now you laugh, but of course it doesn't weigh anything because we're all in free fall. But it does have mass. And so if you get it started moving, you have to be strong enough to stop it as well. And even just being in the spacesuit, if it's a pressurized spacesuit, it's a vacuum outside. And for those of you who remember me from Highland Park High School, you know that Patsy Mueller was always asking me, John, do you live in a vacuum? And I was able to go back years later and tell her, yes, I do work in a vacuum. But inside the spacesuit is 4 pounds per square inch of pure oxygen, which makes the suit want to do this. So if you want to bend your arm, it's roughly like lifting a 25-pound dumbbell all day long. Or holding onto a tool is like squeezing a really firm exercise ball. So you do have to work out a lot to be able to do spacewalks. So Drew and I did another thing, and you'll see him taking out those contact lenses, the big instrument. But after that, you'll see us repairing an instrument that was already in there. So there's Drew. He gives a quick thumbs up as it comes out. So you can see, and this is from one of the shuttle cameras, putting that away. You can see the Earth traveling in the background as we orbit the Earth. The next thing we did for the very first time in space was actually to unscrew a panel from a scientific instrument and replace the circuit boards. So I'm inside the telescope. I've got a special tool to be able to take out tiny screws in space. Now, how do you take out tiny screws in space? With a tiny screwdriver. But you don't want to take them all the way out, because then they'll float around. So we put this contraption on the front. There was a sandwich plate with little holes in it, used another power tool, and you'll see, maybe, if you look very closely, that the screws are floating around inside now. So we trapped those screws, and then I was able to use another tool to pull out the circuit boards. Now, I wanted just to reach in and pull them out, but the edges of those cards are super sharp. And if it cut my glove, the oxygen would leak out, I would die, and that would be bad. It would be bad because the telescope wouldn't get repaired, right? But fortunately, we had that cool tool. We pulled them out. Drew went and put them away. And this was a task that our management had said would be impossible to do in space, in a spacesuit, wearing big hockey gloves. But we wanted to do it. We showed that we could do it. And they said, well, it'll take you 2 days. And I said, it'll take us 2.5 hours. And so I trained and trained and trained with Drew. Every day I would practice with the little screwdriver. And so you can see I'm pretty happy there coming in to the airlock after doing that repair. It took 2 hours and 32 minutes. I'd really put myself on the line and the whole crew. But that night I slept great. I was so happy, so relaxed. The next morning, we have an alarm that goes off. The ground sends up music over a speaker for one of the crew members. You may have heard the wake-up music. It sounds like this. And everybody's going, what was that? Who is that for? And then, the ground calls up and said, that was, some song for Megan. And she's like, okay, if you say so. But anyway, all that happened. And I was still in my sleeping bag sleeping. And everybody's like, all this activity. Now, we sleep with eye shades and earplugs. Megan went to Scott Altman and said, Scooter, that's his nickname, Scooter, I think John's dead. He hasn't moved. And so Scott went over and shook my feet, and I took the eye shades up, and we went off and got ready for the next activities, which was another spacewalk. Well, we did 2 more spacewalks after that. Megan grabbed the telescope, deployed it to space, and fortunately, we could then relax a little bit, have a meal as a crew. I like to hang upside down as a bat, although everybody else is upside down for me. And that's what it's like to have a meal on the space shuttle. This is Drew making a chicken sandwich. We use tortillas instead of bread because bread makes too many crumbs. And for the young folks in the audience, I want you to try this. Peanut butter and jelly at home. Put the peanut butter on it, let go, see what happens. We watched the Hubble go off into the distance. This is one of the last views that humans have seen of the Hubble. Maybe somebody will go back before it dies, maybe not. But also you can see the Earth there. And that's one of the most remarkable things of being in space, is to look at the Earth, to see that thin blue line, that's the entirety of our atmosphere. And I'll show you another picture in just a little bit. My son wanted me to take a picture of a ball of water, and so I certainly obliged. So that's a ball of water floating. And being an astronomer, I realized that a ball of water is actually a lens. And so I focused the image on the image inverted and magnified in the ball of water rather than on Drew Feustel. His nose is actually not that big. And then, a convex lens is a magnifying glass. So I said, Drew, get really close to it. And so that's the magnified image of his eyeball. And then he got a little closer, and as soon as that water touched his face, it just spread out, which is pretty cool. But as I said, I love looking at the Earth from space. I never get tired of it. This is the coast of Africa, the Verde Islands, Green Islands, and the wind is blowing this way, and as it blows over those islands, it's creating these von Karman vortices that go on for hundreds of miles. Really just beautiful anytime to look out at the Earth. This is a sunrise from space. This is, of course, after we got rid of the Hubble Space Telescope. And so that thin blue line there, that's 100 kilometers of atmosphere. Keep in mind that we only live in the bottom 5 kilometers. That's all we can have. So 5% of that thin blue line is the habitable atmosphere of planet Earth. So I think we should all think about that, when we're thinking about global warming and emissions. But it's just stunningly beautiful to see from space. Now, we took off from Florida. We were supposed to land in Florida, but the weather in Florida was terrible. It was like the weather here yesterday, or worse. So we had some time just to fool around. That is Tang. There's that ball of water again. We also did some physics experiments. I'm a physicist, Massimino. This is the stability of rotation about various axes of a solid body. Conservation of angular momentum. Now, while we were down doing physics experiments, the folks upstairs they were playing video games. This is the Land the Shuttle video game. This is actually a high-fidelity simulator of the shuttle dynamics so that Scott Altman could practice that critical landing task. I was filming this, and he'd finish, and I'd say, I don't think I got the video right. Can you do it again? And eventually he picked up that I just wanted him to practice a lot. After a couple of days, we were finally given the go to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, but not to Florida, to California. So Scott put on his California music. Megan said, get to work, which we did. We did our deorbit burn about 5,000 miles away from California. So now we're encased in a 2,000-degree plasma. We're actually knocking the electrons right off of the atoms as we come in, and that's how we slow down. The bottom of the space shuttle is the brake that glows red hot. About 500 miles or so from the coast of California, we picked up the coast. We picked up Edwards Air Force Base, runway 22. Here we are at about 12,000 feet, doing 350 miles an hour, 21 degrees nose down, about 7 times steeper than an airliner, except we have no engine. We're a glider. So fortunately, Scott's a really talented pilot. At 300 feet, the gear comes down, and then we come over the runway. It's a 15,000 foot long by 200 foot wide runway. Scott put it down right on the middle. We deploy a parachute so that when the nose gear touches down, it doesn't hit too hard. We have great brakes on the space shuttle. So as soon as those wheels are all down, we get rid of that parachute so it doesn't get caught in those engines. Slowly roll to a stop. So we orbited the Earth 197 times, roughly 5.4 million miles on my frequent flyer ticket. But at this point, we've landed the shuttle, and we don't know whether we fixed the Hubble or broke the Hubble. There's really no way to know. But over the course of a few weeks, they started turning things back on. And not only had we fixed the Hubble, but we'd gotten that super-duper digital camera in, and the results were spectacular. Now, this is a picture of a cloud of gas and dust that's slowly compressing, and in the middle, a baby star has turned on already. And we know that because we see, it's hard to imagine here, but that's a jet, actually, of gas and dust coming out, and there's another one going this way. And so as the star is forming, it starts spinning and it starts kicking off stuff. But you can't see it because it's in the middle of this cloud of gas and dust. But that baby star has turned on, and the cool thing about this new super duper wide field camera 3 is not only does it have a camera that can see in the light that we can see, visible light, which is what you see here, red, green, and blue, but it can see in infrared light. And that infrared light has a wavelength, it's about a micron, that can sneak through the gas and dust. And so here it is. And there's that baby star, and then those jets. So this is the outline of the nebula, and Hubble can now see through that. You know, in Superman, they would call it X-ray vision, but X-rays actually can't get through that gas and dust, but infrared light does. So I'll just go back one. So there it is. So this is a new capability. Now, Hubble is remarkable in its ability to observe the universe, and I've mentioned that. And so how many of you know the constellation Orion? Can you point at it right now? It's right there, I can tell you. It's right there. Go outside and look, and you'll see it. And what do you see when you see Orion, right? The hunter. Well, you see the outline of the body, you see the belt, and you see the sword. The middle star in the sword is actually not a star at all, but a star-forming region. And when Hubble looks at it, this is what it sees. It sees this beautiful cloud of gas and dust. And there are hundreds of baby stars in this gas and dust that have just turned on. And in fact, it's those those baby stars that are causing this nebula to glow like this. But the reason I'm showing you this picture is not about the science. It's not about new solar systems. That if you were on your computer screen, you could zoom into this and actually see a little disk around those baby stars. It's because this is a really beautiful picture. And I think that's one of the greatest contributions of the Hubble Space Telescope, is it's shown us with the same kind of resolution that we have with human eyeballs, how beautiful the universe is. And that's something that we didn't appreciate with the other telescopes, ground-based telescopes or early space-based telescopes. And that's because we were able to put in that new camera. Now, Hubble also has done some remarkable things, and I don't want to go through the full litany, but because Greg was interested in cosmology and where did we all come from, and how is the universe built, this is an image called the ultra-deep field. Now, in this image, that's a star in our own galaxy, and you can see because it has those spikes on it. And I think there's maybe one or two more. But every other speck in this image is a galaxy with between 50 to 200 billion stars. And it's looking back through the history of the universe. So even the tiniest dot is a whole galaxy. It's just really far away. There are 10,000 galaxies in this picture. Prior to Hubble, this was just a black patch of sky. You couldn't see anything. And so this is one of the unique things that Hubble has done. Now, scientists studying these images have learned some really remarkable things. How old is the universe? 13.72 billion years old. We know that now from Hubble. How fast is the universe expanding? We've learned about that. The existence of black holes, all kinds of other things. But by studying the expansion rate of the universe, 3 astronomers found something a little bit weird. Because we would expect that if there's a big bang and gravity is trying to pull everything together, that the universe would probably be slowing down. And maybe it'll slow down, but it'll keep expanding forever. Or if there's enough stuff in the universe, enough matter like us, it'll slow down, come to a stop, and then come back down, and there'll be a big crunch. And what these guys found is no, the universe is accelerating. But gravity can't explain why it's accelerating. There has to be something weird going on. And they looked at it from every possible direction, and they looked at those images of the static between the UHF and Channel 9, and they said, it just doesn't make sense. Well, eventually they published their results about the acceleration of the universe. And this was the 2011 Nobel Prize in Physics. Adam Rees, Brian Schmidt, and Saul Perlmutter shared that award. And Adam Rees said a few years before we went up, that he was working on this, and we thought it was pretty exciting. And he said, please fix the Hubble or we're never going to know what the answer is. Well, we fixed it. We came back, and Jim Newman, who was on one of those missions, said to Adam, he said, okay, we did our job, now you do yours. And he did, and he won the Nobel Prize. But the interesting thing is the universe is accelerating, and we have no idea why. It's some kind of energy, some kind of pressure that's pushing everything apart. And because astrophysicists are incredibly clever and very descriptive, they called it dark energy. Dark because we don't see what it is, and energy because it's a kind of energy. So not all that creative, really. But this dark energy turns out to be responsible for 68% of all the energy in the universe. Now, I haven't told you about dark matter, but in the 1920s and 30s, some astronomers also looked at the rotation rate of galaxies and said, hey, there's something missing. There's gravity, but we don't see it, so they called it dark matter. And that accounts for 27% of all the stuff in the universe. And 5% is all the stuff we know about. So when I said there are a few details to fill in, that's the 95% of the universe that we have no clue what it is. And so there's still a lot to learn. So how are we going to learn? Well, we need something better than the Hubble. So we invented the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to launch in December from French Guiana. It just arrived at the launch site. It launches on a European Ariane 5. And while the Hubble would fit in this tent, the James Webb Space Telescope won't. It's a big telescope. And people have been working really hard on it for over 20 years. So here's a bunch of NASA engineers working on the telescope. This is in real time. They are working fast and furious to get the telescope together. And it has a 6.5-meter mirror, 20 feet across. And instead of being a single mirror, it's built up of segments. And each segment is flexible, so its shape can be adjusted. So even if they don't get it just right, once we get out into space, we'll be able to adjust those. And this telescope is not a visible telescope the way Hubble is. It's all infrared. And so it will be able to peer into these regions, see further back into the universe, to be able to do some things that Hubble just can't do. One of them is to look at planets as they go across their stars and build a spectra, break the light into its component colors to see if we can see signs of life. But also, because it's an infrared telescope, it's going to be able to look back earlier into the universe than Hubble to see the very first stars and galaxies. And so in a sense, the James Webb Space Telescope is going to try and see the unseen, at least to us, see things that we haven't seen before. And this kind of brings us back to Greg. Greg took that ecstasy not knowing really what was in it. And there was no way to know. Now, Rosalind Franklin could have done an X-ray spectrograph of that and determined that it was tainted. But no reasonable person could do that. And so we all have to think about risk when we do anything, and good decision making. And that's tough. So, when I come to visit Chicago and drive on the Edens, I notice that occasionally there's a big sign on the Edens. And it has a couple of big numbers on it. It says 55. And I scratch my head and I say, what does that mean? Because if I make that 55 the same as the 55 on my speedometer, people are trying to kill me. Because they're driving at least 75. And I don't understand why, because police do have radars. People do get pulled over. I won't ask if anybody's ever been pulled over on the Edens. But did you know that the energy of a vehicle goes like 1/2 times the mass times the velocity squared? That the faster you go, the more energy is in that projectile? And that the difference in energy between 55 miles an hour And 75 is almost a factor of 2. You're almost twice as likely to die in a car crash at 75 than you were at 55. But do you think about that? I'm not going to ask who drives 75 or faster. No. People think about, oh, I can get home 30 seconds earlier if I drive 75. Of course, everybody always ends up in the slow section when everybody's together, and you look over and, I passed that guy 5 minutes ago. So there's really no point. But we make bad decisions. That's a bad decision to speed on the Edens. It really is. But we normalize that because we say, I've been doing this for years. It can't be that risky. Well, the car wasn't designed to have a crash at 75, nor were the tires designed to hold when you try and swerve at 75, really. Our cars are designed around American highways. Now, they can survive that most of the time, but not on a busy expressway like the Edens. So we talk about that. I've already asked you about COVID vaccines. Why did you take an unproven vaccine that was on emergency use authorization? Because the alternative is to get COVID, and you have a really high probability of dying by getting COVID. So we took that risk. That was an informed risk. That was a good decision. Really interesting that we made that good decision. Where are the medical doctors in the audience? Raise your hand. Okay, so I'm going to say something that I've done only a little research on. But as it turns out, these mRNA vaccines, which have actually, that work has been going on for 20 years. I mean, it's amazing. But they may be the most safe vaccine ever produced, and it may be the most safe pharmaceutical ever produced. Now, we didn't know that, but now that we've had hundreds of millions of people injected with the vaccine, it turns out it's 500 times safer than taking a 325 milligram aspirin in terms of the number of people who die from taking an aspirin. Now, it's different, right? You get 2 vaccines, and hopefully that's it. Maybe we get a booster. Hopefully we get rid of COVID. Maybe it's once a year. But people who take a full aspirin, every day, about 500 times more risky to take that aspirin than to get the vaccine. So that was a good decision. So it's really hard for us to know and see the unseen. And so that's why the GPF Foundation is so important, is to help inform people, one, of the risk they're taking, help them make good decisions, and to educate the medical profession to know to ask the right questions. And that's what NASA's great at, is asking these big scientific questions. So with that, pretty much closes out my talk. I'll let Larry up. But thank you all for your generous support. This is a picture of the Hubble Space Telescope. You know the website. That's a picture of Greg looking out at the ocean with his surfboard, with his back to us. And I just want to thank all of you for not turning your back on Greg. So, Larry?
I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. We have time for just maybe one or two. I have a quick one for you that was in the news, which was, usually when people see a flying saucer, some people hold it up as the Holy Grail. Most people roll their eyes. But recently, you saw fighter jet pilots talking about something that was unfamiliar to them. It was in CBS News, the New York Times. That kind of brought it to a different level.
Did they see Trump in their sights?
What? And I think the reaction of the audience was, well, they're fighter pilots. They know what they're doing. How do you explain that? And I've talked to people in your position about this for a story that I'm working on, but I'm curious about your response to that.
So I've spent a lot of time in space, which this is unknown aerial phenomena, formerly known as UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And they are just that. I mean, they're things that people have seen that we can't explain. Now, there's a classified report that went to Congress that the Pentagon developed, and then there's the unclassified version that we all saw. Now, I just think it's a little unusual that, one, it's only Navy pilots, or Navy ship
Yeah.
personnel, and only U.S. pilots and U.S. ships, and only ones that use a certain contractor's radars and image recognition systems.
Interesting.
No, seriously.
No, that's interesting.
So, my first reaction is, having been in space, no aliens visited the space shuttle, much to our disappointment. We saw lots of things that weren't explained specifically, but we could generally explain. For instance, on my first launch, we look out a few days later, and we see a small blinking light. And it's going blink, blink, blink. Get out the binoculars, and what do you see? Blink, blink, and it's following us. 17,500 miles an hour. Almost certainly a chunk of ice, probably, 2,000 feet away, but you can't tell the difference between 2,000 feet and 200 miles.
Yeah.
It's either something really big, a UFO blinking, or something really close, and it's rotating, catching the sun, and blinking at us. And we see that kind of thing a lot. In fact, the Apollo astronauts were the first to see that kind of thing. So, by extension, first of all, we have really short lifetimes. So the distance between the stars are so vast, that even with the best technology we can imagine, it would still take hundreds of years to get to the nearest star. So let's say an alien can live that long. It's possible. They come to Earth, and what do? They run around in front of Navy pilots trying to evade them before they disappear into the water, and we don't see them. I mean, don't you think they would, go to the Field Museum and the Art Institute and the Admiral Planetarium, and try and find, Mayor Daley and say, what happened to Chicago?
Or they'd have the technology to monitor us without having to land on an aluminum ship with blinking lights on our planet. A quick question or two, anybody? Yes.
I just want to say thank you so much for being here for the foundation, but also thank you for letting us see through your eyes what you've seen in your life. It's just, I'm not even sure I have the words to describe it. My question is, I was looking at your spacesuit, I was looking at your task, I was imagining what your day is like up there, and I'm wondering if at any time amidst all the tasks and all the busyness and all the pressure and all the work, if you just took a breath and just felt what it was like to be out there. And I'd just like to know about, if you had one of those moments, what did it feel like?
Actually, that's a great question, because on my first couple of missions, we were, first of all, there is a lot of pressure. We have a lot of tasks to do. And the first time I did a spacewalk, at the end, and this was after 8 hours of 40 minutes of working outside in the spacesuit, came back in and I thought, I never took the time to look around, to have the human experience, to absorb all of this. And I talked to Steve Smith at that time, 1999, who was my spacewalking partner, and I said, the next time we go out, let's try and find some time to look at the Earth, to look at the Hubble, to think about the enormity of what we're doing. And so then on the next mission as commander, I built that time into my crewmates' schedule out spacewalking, so that every crew member would have some period of minutes where they didn't have a task, and they knew it, that they could just look out at the Earth or look out into space. And on this last mission, I actually had about 15 minutes where I was waiting for Drew that was programmed in. And I was laying on my back, I had one hand on a handrail, and that was the bottom of the shuttle payload bay, and I was waiting for him to get the bolts off, grab a computer that he would bring down to me, we would swap, I would put it away. And it was absolutely magical. First of all, in the spacesuit, and you wouldn't necessarily think this, but it was just so comfortable. Afterwards, I asked the docs to pull my heart rate data. My heart rate got down to 40 because I was so relaxed. I'd sort of say at peace in the universe. But I was so relaxed looking up at the Hubble Space Telescope. The Earth was going by. I could look over, and there's the blackness of space. And I thought, this is not a place where humans have any evolutionary preparedness to survive in space. William Shatner actually said this to Jeff Bezos yesterday. He said, 1 minute you're on Earth, and the next minute it's death. Now, they were going up and they were coming down no matter what. And one of their safety mechanisms is, even if all the air leaks out, they're going to be back down so that they'd probably survive anyway. But to him, that's how he felt. And I felt like, isn't it remarkable that we can, build creatively these spacesuits or the space shuttle or now a space station to be able to survive in an environment where humans can't survive. But mostly, it was just the magical feeling of floating in space and seeing our beautiful Earth.
One more. Go ahead. Sure.
Executive privilege.
Yeah, right.
John, didn't you have something to do with the Mars program and the landing last year?
I did. Once I left and being an active astronaut, I went to run the whole science program for NASA. And strangely, the administration had cut the Mars program in the federal budget. And I thought that was crazy. And so I worked really hard to get Congress to fund the Mars program. And one of the ways I did that was to start this new rover. At the time, it was called Mars 2020. And so I started that rover project and saw it through construction. But that wasn't enough. There were companies like SpaceX doing all these cool things and others. And I said, NASA has been known for doing cool things. And somebody brought an idea to me, which is other people had said was crazy. They said, we'd like to fly a helicopter on Mars. And I said, that's a great idea. And I found the funding for that and shepherded that through. And that's the Ingenuity helicopter that's now flown a dozen times.
That's great.
I called it a Mars hack. And the only fear was that it would become more famous than the rover itself. And it kind of has, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So, Doctor, we want to thank you for joining us this evening. I'm so used to saying morning.
Well, thank you for joining us. And just so you all know, at 3:15 a.m. tomorrow morning, Larry has to get up and get ready for his show. So thank you so much for coming.
My biggest challenge is like reading a 4-syllable Russian hockey player's name, so it pales in comparison. But I think you would agree that one thing that space and magic have in common is critical thinking, and that's why I love magic. Other than the wow factor, there really is this critical thinking element that goes along with magic and how things are done. And we've got a great guest, Dan White, who's a friend of the organization and has been here many times and is here with us virtually for this amazing illusion. Dan White. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.